The $70 game sold on a lie. That may sound a little bit aggressive, but we're no longer playing because this is categorically true. This game is a 3 out of 10, despite being basically well reviewed on other platforms, being sold for like whopping $70, and they more or less just lied to people about what it was going to look like and how it was going to play. I am, of course, talking about Mortal Kombat 1. So whenever it was announced, people went, okay, a Switch port? Is that going to work? And the answer seems to be, not really. It lacks significant facial details. It has issues with textures, lighting concerns all over the place. There's also bugs, issues, gameplay, performance, a lot of that thing, even to the point where IGN gave the port its own review and its own score, 3 out of 10. It's a lot to ask of the aging phone chip inside a handheld, especially with how the visual fidelity of Mortal Kombat's fatalities can be taxing. So it's $70 on all platforms, right? You get the perfectly fine, everyone's enjoying it version on the other consoles, $70. Or you can get it on Switch and get this massively downgraded version for the same price. It barely runs, it's a 3 out of 10. Is that actually fair, right? I think if the Switch version was literally marketed as, it's literally a choice, hey, this is worse, but it has to be to run on this platform. If it said that, this might be a little bit of it's just a consumer choice, right? You can buy it there or you can buy it there. It's up to you. The product isn't quite at parity. You know that going in. But what happened is they kind of didn't do that at all, right? So you look at the store page for it on the Switch, right? They hid how the game looked. No trailers, nothing. Absolutely nothing there. So you're just buying Mortal Kombat and say you're like, okay, well, I don't know what it looks like. Most people will just type Mortal Kombat 1 and start looking at stuff. So you open that, you open some videos, you open some images, you go, oh, that looks pretty good. That's the game I'm getting on Switch. I guess I'll go buy it then. And there's a little bit of caveat emptor, buyer beware there, to be completely fair. But at the same time, you go to the store and they're not showing you what it is. That's a dick move in no uncertain terms. And it's not like that's standard, because even the freshly announced Tomb Raider remasters, which are still a way out, already have screenshots up there so you know what you're going to buy. And then you look over at the Xbox version of the game on the store and hey, look at that. Screenshots. Look at that. Trailers. Not hiding anything here. Why? Because the game looked great. The game looks fantastic there. And then people found something else that was a little bit interesting. Kind of industry standard, but in this case, it really rubbed people the wrong way, right to the point of questioning, should they be open to legal action for this? Because the Nintendo of America account uploaded a launch trailer for the game, and it was the PC version. It was just literally the captured directly from Steam, even to the point where one of the test achievements for Steam, clearly a build that they're working on internally, just showed up in the corner. So you're watching the Switch trailer for the game, and it's a Steam version, and the Switch version looks horrible by comparison. It's, arguably not the same game, especially when you consider all the performance issues. And that's where people are sitting going, that is literally selling a $70 game on a lie. Hence the title, hence opening the video like this. This is something that Warner Brothers have clearly just tried to get away with. And we'll get a little bit of more detail on that. So Nintendo of America actually pulled the trailer down, obviously because everyone went, that's bullshit, get rid of it now. And they're, oh, okay, sure. So NetherRealm's head, Ed Boon, actually did speak to the BBC about this and acknowledged the Switch port was having issues. He said it will absolutely be getting an update, and a number of concerns of the issue that have come up will absolutely be addressed. When, I think, is the important question here, but he says it would have been ideal for us to have released the version that we absolutely wanted. Anything we're finding with a problem is on our list and is going to be fixed. And that's a good enough promise, but that's curious. It would have been ideal for us to have released the version that we absolutely wanted, which means they released a version that they didn't want. Why would they do that? So let's look into it. The Switch port was handled by Saber Interactive and Shiver Entertainment, who handled the Mortal Kombat 11 port. And that is fine. Saber do good work. There's nothing here that screams, oh, someone in the pipeline really made a horrible mistake, or, there's no malice seemingly here. But then you have to remember it's Warner Brothers publishing it. NetherRealm are beholden to no one except Warner Brothers. I feel like NetherRealm probably could have very much stopped this, if not for the publisher saying, listen, we need this out now. Switch is a big platform. We don't care what happens. We don't care how bad it is. Just make it happen. And this is where I'm very happy that this is actually getting a little bit of traction in the media and stuff, especially with IGN literally being able to go, this is a 3 out of 10 game. You have released a 3 out of 10 port, deal with that fact, because it's so frustrating for developers. I know, I'm not the biggest fan of the Mortal Kombat series, despite being a big FGC head, but I like Mortal Kombat 1's reception so far has been, outside of things like Megan Fox's voice acting for some reason, it seems to be pretty widely successful so far. People are raving about it. I hear even the story mode is substantially better than before, which I think it's good to see, but it's just so frustrating that Warner Brothers Publishing are just yeah, what if we just tell people a load of lies about how our game looks and sell them for $70? I mean, if you're going to release a worse port, at least drop it to 60. maybe even go, it's a quick reversion. It doesn't have feature parity, $40 or $50. You just need to do right by your consumer in some capacity. But in this case, they clearly just went, nah, we will just lie by omission in case of the store page. Send misleading footage to Nintendo of America to upload on their channel, which I'm sure they're going to be very, very happy about. I know, obviously, the Switch has quality control issues when you look at the store and you see the amount of games for questionable age ranges show up there. That's been a pretty big topic recently. Same, the PS store is also pretty bad for quality control of late, but Nintendo should be able to slap Warner Brothers a little bit for this. But at the same time, I hope it gets fixed. People will buy it. I hope it gets fixed. To end this topic and move on in a slightly lighter note, we could be looking at a different era, right? Because this brought up memories of a couple of versions of Mortal Kombat. The SNES version had sweat instead of blood, and all the fatalities were censored. And then someone else brought up Mortal Kombat Advance. That's a game that was completely unrecognizable, and it calls back to an era where ports for mobile devices like the Game Boy Advance and the DS were completely different games entirely. Not even vaguely reminiscent of the actual game they're supposed to be, but sold on the same name. Now, obviously, you'd pick up the box and go, well, that's not Mortal Kombat that I know. But, the name would still be there. But it's fascinating seeing how publishers handle the feature parity and the lack of parity between platforms. I wish I could say I'm surprised. Now it's time for some of the follow-ups on the Xbox leaks, because, believe it or not, Phil Spencer, despite that email about him seemingly suggesting that he had someone on the inside working towards getting them more leverage on the board of directors of Nintendo for an eventual buyout. I've seen some people discuss that email is actually basically corporate speak for whoever brought the idea to him saying, listen, no, this is probably not going to happen, it's not going to happen, but in a very corporate leadership way of not telling them the idea is stupid and kind of explaining why it's not going to work in a positive light. Not too sure about how true that is, but Phil himself has definitely managed to worm his way out of these leaks in a way that's, I think, fascinating. He says, we've seen the conversation around old emails and documents. It is hard to see our team's work shared in this way because so much has changed and there's so much to be excited about right now and in the future. We will share the real plans when we are ready. Basically, that's a very classy answer. It immediately goes, hey, this is hurtful to our team, and also all those plans have probably changed, which I think is interesting, but we do have to go into a little bit more detail because obviously people are digging through documents or finding new stuff, and there's some real interesting takeaways about Xbox from this. So there was an internal email that leaked, and it was very apologetic towards staff, being like, oh yeah, we're so sorry this happened. This is going to be really hurtful to you and all your plans. Everything's leaked. This is horrible and terrible. And people are kind of going, that's a bit interesting. That's very apologetic. Where's the outrage? Where's the memes? Where's the fun? Where's the Xbox's goofy nature that they show publicly? And the answer is it's not there because they did it. Some poor sod in Microsoft accidentally just attached a load of stuff to an email and submitted it all. And that's since been resolved, but not before everyone has copies of everything. So the first big thing we learned is Game Pass cost, right? How much do you think, and this is going to be interesting for the future of indies, the future of how third parties get onto Game Pass. And basically we'll get to find out the grand subscriptioning of all video games. Will that continue and how expensive is it? So with some ideas based on a 2022 email, so not that long ago, where Xbox scrambled to find games to fill the Starfield-shaped hole left in their schedule, right? They came with a couple things like wow factor criteria and wildcard factors. So Star Wars Jedi Survivor, they estimated it was going to cost $300 million to get that on Game Pass. That's so much money. That's a third of $1 billion for a game. That would require 30 million signups for a month to get that Game Pass cost back. They're really going in on this. And that's the expected partner ask, with 100 million estimated hours of people playing, which is a lot of on-platform engagement. Xbox would love that. But the wildcard part is they say, crown jewel, they won't do, which obviously makes sense if EA want people on their own platform. Then there's some other ones like Mortal Kombat 1 being $250 million, Suicide Squad allegedly being around $250 million, Assassin's Creed Rift, which is now known as Mirage, $100 million, that's surprising compared to Suicide Squad. I think Assassin's Creed is more likely to be the bigger game, considering I've seen people say that these emails reminded them that Suicide Squad was a game that was going to release, so there you go. And then Dying Light 2, $50 million. But there's something else here that sells me on Xbox as a platform quite well, right? Or at least maybe not platform, but as well as at least in some capacity, how they operate things, right? And this is a good news for video games. Lego Star Wars had a comparatively small cost, the estimate of $35 million to get on Game Pass. But they said in the wildcards, PC tech readiness timing is questionable. Fair enough. Negative crunch culture press will make them not want to push teams unreasonably. And there you have it. You have another admission of guilt from within the industry of negative crunch will result in press. People do not want to crunch teams as much anymore because of the possibility of negative press, because of bad PR, because as soon as crunch stories get out, they actually happen, which goes to show that constantly talking about what the publishers do, constantly talking about what these people are actually up to, how hard they're pushing devs into the dust, how much, as I discussed in the recent Unity video, how much future talent in the video game industry is being crushed in cases like this. It works. They're afraid of it. They're afraid of it because they know it's going to cause bad PR. It's going to make them look bad. And maybe there's not a massive downside to it in the terms of the bottom line, but they're still a little bit afraid about it. They're still thinking about it, which I think is very, very good news. So yeah, the press system is actually kind of working because obviously Traveler's Tale crunch was a big topic. So reviving that again would have hurt them. And there's another fun thing about Game Pass. Game Pass subs play 14 hours more than non-Game Pass subs per month. They also spend $23 more than non-Game Pass subs per year. And that's the whole thing of a platform. You get people on Game Pass, you get people playing the game more, you get people playing a variety of games more, and they're more likely to buy new games, obviously because they also get the discount as part of being a Game Pass member. But they get the discount, they get more time on brand, more time on platform, and more time in the store. All of this is more confirmation that Microsoft are spending money to make money, even with Fallout 76. Obviously, that went a little bit wrong for a while, but he said, interesting place, started rough, team stays focused. Whether need to see this thing getting to 10 million MAUs or move on, and if PlayStation Now can support it gaining relevance, then I'm supportive. That's the thing you see about the live servicification of video games. That's what you see about all of this content push, all of this crazy play more. It's all towards get your ass in that chair, get your eyes on that store, because that's where we make the money. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, realistically. It's just that's how to think about every decision they're making if you want to arm yourself as a consumer. Now, when we last talked about the Xbox leaks, I talked at length about how much the cloud is kind of the worry, right? How them focusing almost too much on the cloud and too much away from the core gamer experiences, something that's going to hurt us likely as core gamers, as PC gamers, stuff like that. So in another case, they were talking to Phil. This was a leaked deposition where they were talking about the importance of this chart, right? The importance of basically the blue and the light green. How much of cloud first and PC first is important to them over console first. And basically this Phil more or less said they didn't go far enough with their game subscription estimates and they want significantly more PC and cloud. So there you have it. Expect PC and cloud to be very, very forward, especially when you look at some stuff with Battle.net and their acquisition of ABK and how the Game Pass app and the Xbox app could be substantially better. We may actually have a pretty decent service going forward, hopefully. But again, the cloud. Get your $99 Xbox device and it'll run stuff in the big internet and you'll be able to play your games and there will be no problems. Trust us, there never are. One more fun thing from this deposition is I can fairly safely say if we do not make more progress than this off of console, we would exit the gaming business. They know the future is not on console. That kind of sucks to hear, but that's where they're pushing it. That's for a good reason though, because we now know how many consoles they're actually selling in proportion. How many are the expensive one, the flagship, the great one, and how many are the little white box that goes in the corner and kind of gimped them a little bit when it came to Baldur's Gate's release. So this leak said that 75% of Xbox Series owners are Series S owners, with the other 25% in Series X. We did some extrapolation and went, well, if this is true, then that would mean they've got 5 million Series X's, 50 million Series S's. But what we found out a little bit later on is that actually it's about 50-50, coming from Matt Piscatella of NPD. Circana's retail tracking service, S accounts for a bit more than half of US Series owners, and X has seen improved supply and purchasing since that 2022 date. That's still 50% of their console audience don't care about the big fancy experience. If you extrapolate from that, then how many people would be happy to pay $100 for a way to play them that look a little bit worse and run a little bit worse? And that's the power of the wide audience. That's the getting it into everyone's hands that they're going for. And outside of PlayStation 5 and Sony having quite a few little hurdles have kind of tripped up over recently in a bunch of ways, it seems like we're very much going for that premium versus play anywhere split in a massive category. Obviously, you could think of Nintendo as well, but basically no one thinks of Nintendo because they are a force unto their own in a massive way. So in terms of what the Xbox versus PlayStation looks like, I think you're going to see almost an Android versus Apple kind of split. It looks like that thing that we were suggesting way back when this generation was first announced. It looks like that's going to be the case. It's been almost 2 whole years since Microsoft announced that they were going to acquire Activision. And now it's over. The deal isn't quite finished yet, but there are no more major obstacles. The last vanguard against the deal, the UK CMA, they've finally come out and said exactly what Microsoft wanted to hear. It's fine, on one condition. If Microsoft sell Ubisoft the cloud rights to all Activision Blizzard King products, that is enough of a mitigation that all of their concerns are solved and they'll be willing to see the deal through. They didn't let it go without a little bit of snark though, because the CEO of the CMA, Sarah Cardell, said, "It would have been far better though if Microsoft had put forward this restructure during our original investigation. It illustrates the cost, uncertainty, and delay that parties can incur if a credible and effective remedy option exists, but is not put on the table." Which is more or less just a statement of, yeah, well, you could have made this a lot easier for yourself if you'd actually behaved, which they obviously in this case didn't. So while it's not completely over yet, they're happy to accept and provisionally approve the merger proposal. Worth noting that this is the preliminary finding. Of course, there's public consultation, there's people can bring up new ideas and new problems and things like that. And obviously with the recent leak of Microsoft documents, there's probably quite a lot to talk about there. That came from the FTC case in the US. The CMA probably knew all of this, but if someone publicly has, oh, hang on, actually we have new concerns raised, that could possibly still be brought up in public consultation. But at this point, I can't imagine that, because if their issue was cloud and the cloud goes to Ubisoft, then that's more or less, there's really not an awful lot left, right? There are a couple concerns regarding enforceability too, like Activision's cloud streaming rights to Ubisoft could be circumvented, terminated, or not enforced. But Microsoft has said, here, listen, this is how we're actually going to do this. We'll make sure that it's not. And everyone's kind of going, okay, sure. Microsoft are not waiting around though. They've basically asked the CMA, can we just close this deal now? Is like permission, even if there's a chance that you're going to say no, can we like start the process and make sure everything goes through? So that's basically it, right? There's some stuff for the FTC. The FTC is still trying to fight against it in all of their ways, but I think generally they've been a little bit on the back foot. I know even some people talking about the leaked documents. People were even suggesting, and it obviously turns out that Microsoft released them via mistake, but people were saying the FTC was getting a little bit worried and petty, so they're trying to get some ammo there, which obviously that's a baseless accusation, and obviously we know false. But it does show the kind of opinion going into the FTC's ability to stop this. So obviously the FTC would be able to unravel the deal. If the deal goes through, they merge, everything gets sorted. If they then take them to court over it and get it removed, then they would have to unravel it, which would be it'd be such an awful experience for everyone involved. But if it's necessary, it will be necessary. But that's more or less, that's the end of the saga in terms of the blockers. It's going to go through and everything that happens will happen. The cloud future is a little bit secure from their monopolistic grasp, with Ubisoft somehow magically securing a massive win out of this, which, you know, like if you'd said, who's the real winner of the Microsoft and Activision Blizzard King acquisition, and someone turns around and says, actually Ubisoft got a good deal, you'd wonder what the hell they've been smoking. But turns out, you know, I guess reality stranger in fiction in a bunch of ways. The other thing worth noting, and we'll likely talk about this in like great detail later once it gets resolved and once it gets, you know, actually put through, because the landscape has changed a lot in 2 years, especially regarding Xbox, even regarding how Activision Blizzard King are doing things, because their games, you know, they've released Diablo 4, they've got Dragonflight is out, the WoW expansion, and we're seeing what's happening over there. We're seeing like their mobile game come to fruition. There's an awful lot different between then and now, so we will likely have to do a whole re-examination of what this likely means. But for one thing that I think is very good for right now, there's a lot of talk about emulation and platforms here, and one of the things that I thought was fantastic was that Ubisoft are actually in a position where they can tell Activision Blizzard to put all of their games on Proton. For the purposes of cloud stuff, they can literally say, hey, because of this like binding legal agreement that basically your entire business is now based on, you have to do these things for us. So I'm very happy to see that Linux gamers and you know, obviously Steam, Proton, I'm very happy to see that maybe we'll get a big win out of this. That would be that would be great. But generally, I think we also have to talk about consolidation. If you look at what Microsoft said in those leaks, you look at what the emails said, you see what they talked about with studios, and they're all in on expanding Game Pass. They're going to spend money hand over fist to get more games, more IP. They know they needed to stay relevant, with Phil even saying that if Game Pass wasn't successful, they would have had to leave the console market. That's how dicey things are. That's how, even at the top, because that's Xbox, right? That is a household name. People know what Xbox is. maybe more people know what PlayStation is, but it's still a household name and a household product. And even they're worried about the market. That's how grotesque things have gotten. That's how the stakes are now with this massive consolidation, with this massive, too big to fail asterisk industry that's going on. And you look at Embracer, right? You look at Embracer and what's happened to them. They had one, now to be fair, it was a major deal. They had one major deal fall through, and suddenly they're closing studios. Even, I believe it was recently, Lars Wingefors, the CEO, even saying that it's just, if they don't secure extra funding, if they don't secure extra cash flow from investors and things like that, then they're just going to have to start putting studios on the chopping block. And that feels so unbelievably unfair, because they bought so many studios up and they were on such a spending spree to acquire everything. A lot of those studios saw immediate, here's all this money, here's all the support, fantastic. But it's ultimately ended up they've been grafted onto this tree that's rotting at the core. Maybe that's a bit of a weird analogy for it, but that's what it feels like to me. It feels like there's just one big poisonous blob going around, assimilating everything, and everything it eats gets to stay inside intact for a little bit. But once the membrane breaks down, once that poisonous blob needs to destroy them, it will, and it has. And it's a bit different with Activision being a massive studio as well, going into Xbox, but it feels like we're creating almost these gaming Towers of Babel, where they're getting so close to so monopolistic and so gigantic and incredible. The bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? I know I'm speaking a lot in allegory and metaphor, but I feel like that's the way the industry's largely been going with acquisition and consolidation recently. It's been good for some, but it's also, from a consumer perspective, it looks really dangerous. It looks like just a lot of short-term profit incentive is controlling a lot of what we actually see out of the industry. And obviously sometimes if a small studio can't survive by itself, then that's just the way it is. And it's really hard to work around that. I think I've maybe mused a little bit long. We'll certainly have to examine this now that it's going through. Do you like listening to video game soundtracks on YouTube? Because I sure do. And if you're like me, this news sucks ass. Zelda-like adventure game Tunic, obviously I've not gotten to play it yet, unfortunately, even though it's on Game Pass, but it seems astounding. It's some beautiful music. The soundtrack was pulled from streaming services along with other soundtracks, despite the team not doing that or wanting that. So the composer Lifeformed and co-composer said an unknown individual launched a DMCA attack on their work, sending a spurious claim to Apple Music and saying, hey, this belongs to us and we don't want it there. And Apple just went, okay, goodbye, we'll remove it, no problem. And then the attacker gave a false email address, so there's no recourse. It's literally up to the composers to prove this person wrong, this person that they can't get in contact with at all. That escalated past Apple then with DistroKid, who basically centralized distribution of everything. You've likely seen DistroKid as one of the channels on YouTube that post a lot of things. It's pulled ever on all, a lot of music going with it, because Deltarune, obviously Undertale's follow-up, that soundtrack, that's going to be a lot of people listening to that because it's fantastic, and it was pulled. The distributor Materia Collective say it's an incredibly unpleasant situation. Little to no protections offered to make smaller artists who make their living with soundtrack work on games. Literally just one person control and remove a soundtrack. That's how this industry kind of is, unfortunately. They can still obviously have their own Bandcamp pages and stuff like that, so they're not completely left in the dark. The DMC system is very important. It's very useful. Otherwise, copyright infringement creators would be destroyed all over the internet. But man, this sucks so bad. That's why I'm happy to see places like Square Enix Music, and there was someone else recently, Bandai Namco, so it was, they recently basically realized people listened to their stuff on YouTube, went, why are we not in on that? Not even just from a perspective of, can we make revenue and stuff like that, but from the perspective of, if we put soundtracks on YouTube and then we put a list, a link, or a list of links in the description to where to buy them or where to buy the games, surely that's going to be eyeballs, right? That's marketing, free marketing. All you do is upload your soundtrack. So Square Enix and Bandai Namco have been doing that, which is great. Hopefully there's a lot more of an official push from this and a lot more protections added up overall. And our last story for today is that gaming is good, actually, according to Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. So earlier this year, right, there were a bunch of riots in France. There was an instance of police violence against a 17-year-old, and Macron said video games were to blame. He very, very, very went back on that and actually gave, maybe it's just because it's French, but it's a very almost very romanticized version of what video games are good for. So if you ever need a world leader's quotes on, video games being good, if you need to convince anyone, your family, friends who maybe don't quite agree, you can show them this, right? They are a ground for artistic experimentation, A fascinating learning space mixing all the arts. Playing means listening to music, immersing yourself in stories, feeling emotions, travelling through time. It is exploring visual universes that write a new chapter in the history of art. Video games are an integral part of France. Assassin's Creed and Dofus are the creations of French talent. We are proud of it, and we make it easier to access with the Culture Pass. Self-sponsor segment, sure, go for it. In June 2022, I brought together many players from French esports and the sector at the Élysée Palace. If I didn't shine at Trackmania, my words were sincere. I promised a new era. It is opening. So games were a scapegoat, and now they're the pride of France, which honestly, like as dumb as that sounds, that is very good in terms of wanting video games to be better. Because like I talked about with the Unity video about talent, if the government thinks games are good and the government are willing to like make pathways for funding and things like that available, obviously we know quite a lot about that and having to engage with it with our like partners at the Nice Screen and stuff. The more that can happen, the more that devs actually have like success and have footholds and have ways to learn, ways to teach and things like that. It seems like industry bodies have been putting in a lot of work recently over in France for getting that sorted, which I think is fantastic news. Or maybe like Ease Gameo just had a quiet word. I'm not sure if he's powerful enough to do that, but I'd like to think so. Anyway, that is it. We've had an interesting set of stories today. It's unfortunate that Warner Brothers have had to kind of put a dampener on Mortal Kombat in a way by just going $70 games sold on lies. Those consumer pay pigs they'll eat whatever shit we shovel at them, go for it. It is unfortunate because everything else has been not quite positive, but we definitely live in interesting times for video games, and I'm very happy to be bringing you the news. In fact, I'll even bring you more tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you then.